It started with an invitation, one that Usha Vance knew would be a trap. The producers of the National Forum, a primetime liberal talk show, had reached out, requesting her presence for what they called an open and honest discussion about the future of America. Usha, a Yale-educated lawyer and the wife of Vice President JD Vance, was no stranger to public scrutiny. She had watched as the mainstream media attacked her husband relentlessly, twisting his words, questioning his beliefs, and painting him as a radical. But this time, they weren't after JD. This time, they wanted her. "You don't have to do this," JD told her as he paced their home in Washington, D.C. "You know how they operate. They're going to corner you, twist your words, and make you look like the villain." Usha smiled, calm, composed, and unwavering. "I know," she said, "and I'm ready for it." Her decision sent shockwaves through political circles. Conservative supporters saw it as a bold move, a chance to challenge the biased narrative. Liberal pundits, on the other hand, saw it as an opportunity to undermine her, to expose what they called the extremism of the Vance family. As the night of the interview approached, the nation braced for what was sure to be a spectacle. Social media exploded with speculation. Would she hold her own? Would she crumble under pressure? The entire country was watching. Then the moment arrived. Usha Vance, dressed in an elegant navy blue suit, stepped onto the set of the National Forum with a quiet confidence that was impossible to ignore. The audience was packed with viewers who leaned liberal, their faces a mix of curiosity and skepticism. The show's host, Madison Clarke, was a sharp-tongued commentator known for her relentless questioning of conservative figures. "Mrs. Vance," Madison began, crossing her legs and adjusting her microphone. "Thank you for being here tonight." "Thank you for having me," Usha replied, her voice steady. Madison wasted no time before launching into the first question. "You and your husband have been vocal supporters of policies that many argue are outdated and even harmful, particularly when it comes to social issues. Tell me, do you think your stance represents the real America? Or are you just catering to a vocal minority?" A hush fell over the room. The battle had begun. Usha met Madison's gaze without flinching. "I think the real America is made up of people who want honest conversations. Not labels, not media narratives, but the truth." Madison smirked, as if she had already won. "So, let's talk about the truth," she said, leaning forward. "Your husband has spoken against woke culture, against government overreach, against the influence of leftist ideology in schools. Do you believe America is moving in the right direction? Or are conservatives just resisting progress?" Usha took a slow breath before delivering a response that no one in the studio was prepared for. The air in the studio was thick with anticipation. Madison Clarke, ever the aggressive interviewer, had set her trap, framing conservatives as obstacles to progress. It was a question designed to put Usha Vance on the defensive, to force her into justifying beliefs that the media had spent years demonizing. But Usha was no ordinary guest. She didn't flinch, didn't scramble to appease the audience. Instead, she met Madison's gaze with quiet certainty. "I think the word progress has been hijacked," Usha said calmly. "Real progress means making life better for all Americans, not just the ones who agree with you. But lately, progress seems to mean forcing an ideology onto people, silencing opposing voices, and rewriting history to fit a particular narrative." A murmur ran through the audience. Some nodded in agreement while others exchanged skeptical glances. Madison, however, was unfazed. She adjusted her glasses, a smirk playing on her lips. "Are you saying that fighting for equality and social justice is a bad thing?" she challenged. "Because that's what this so-called woke culture is about, giving marginalized people a voice." Usha tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "Giving people a voice is important," she acknowledged. "But what we're seeing today isn't about amplifying voices, it's about silencing certain ones. If you don't conform to a specific ideology, you're labeled as a threat, a bigot, or worse. That's not equality. That's coercion." The smirk on Madison's face faltered for just a moment, but she recovered quickly. "Let's be honest, Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "Your husband, and by extension, you, have been part of an administration that has openly opposed things like gender ideology in schools and DI programs in corporations. Isn't it just an attempt to drag America backward?" This time, Usha let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. Madison, let's talk about reality, not slogans. Parents across America, Democrats, Republicans, and independents are saying the same thing. They want schools to focus on education, not indoctrination. They want their kids to learn math, science, and history, not be told they should feel guilty for the color of their skin or confused about their identity. Is that backward? Or is that common sense? The audience reaction was divided. Some clapped while others let out audible groans of disapproval. Madison leaned forward, her voice rising slightly. So, are you saying systemic racism and historical oppression aren't real? That America has no responsibility to acknowledge its past and fix its present? Usha's expression remained composed. Acknowledging history is important, but weaponizing history to divide people? That's dangerous. My own story proves that America isn't the oppressive nation that some claim it to be. Madison raised an eyebrow. How so? Usha's gaze didn't waver. My family immigrated to this country with nothing. My parents worked hard so I could have opportunities they never had. I studied, I built a career, and now I have the privilege to sit here today as the wife of the Vice President. That didn't happen because America is a racist country. It happened because America, at its core, is a land of opportunity. Does racism exist? Of course. But does that mean we should teach kids that they're either oppressors or victims based on their skin color? No. That's not justice, that's division. The audience was stunned into silence. Even Madison seemed momentarily at a loss for words. But she wasn't done yet. Well, Madison said finally, forcing a chuckle, you certainly have a way with words, Mrs. Vance. But let's shift gears. Your husband has taken a strong stance against the current administration's immigration policies. Given your background, don't you find that hypocritical? A calculated attack. A personal attack. But Usha didn't blink. In fact, she leaned forward as if inviting the challenge. Madison Clarke had just lobbed a calculated attack, painting Usha Vance as a hypocrite for supporting her husband's stance on immigration. It was a classic move, one designed to put Usha in a defensive position. But Usha wasn't rattled. She didn't fumble or scramble for an answer. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, her expression unwavering. That's an interesting way to frame it, she said calmly. But it's also misleading. Madison raised an eyebrow. Misleading? How so? Usha nodded. You're implying that because my family immigrated to the U.S., I should automatically support any immigration policy regardless of whether it benefits or harms Americans. That's like saying if someone benefited from a scholarship, they should support giving scholarships to everyone, even if it bankrupts the program. A few chuckles rippled through the audience. Madison, however, was unimpressed. But surely, as someone from an immigrant background, you can sympathize with those seeking a better life in America? Of course I can, Usha replied without hesitation. My family came here legally. We followed the process, abided by the laws, and worked hard to build a life here. That's the American dream. But what we're seeing today isn't the same thing. Madison narrowed her eyes. And what exactly are we seeing today? Usha didn't miss a beat. We're seeing an open border crisis that hurts everyone. Legal immigrants, American workers, and even the very people who are coming here illegally. We're seeing fentanyl flooding across the border, human trafficking operations thriving, and hardworking Americans competing with an unchecked flow of illegal labor. This isn't compassion. This is chaos. A murmur spread through the audience. Some nodded in agreement while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Madison, sensing she was losing ground, tried another angle. So, what's the alternative? Just shutting the door on everyone? Usha shook her head. No. The alternative is enforcing the law. Having a secure border doesn't mean we stop welcoming immigrants, it means we welcome them the right way. The same way my family did. The same way millions have done for generations. A country that doesn't control its borders ceases to be a country at all. The audience reaction was mixed. Some clapped while others booed. Madison, however, wasn't ready to give up. That's a pretty rigid stance, she said. But let's talk about another issue that's deeply personal to many Americans, women's rights. Your husband has been criticized for his pro-life stance. As a woman, don't you feel that restricting access to abortion is a step backward? The question was loaded. It was meant to paint Usha as out of touch with women's rights, as someone who didn't understand the struggles of women across the country. But Usha had been prepared for this. She knew this question was coming. She took a slow breath before responding, her voice steady. Let's talk about what women's rights actually means, she said. Because if we're going to have this conversation, we need to be honest about it. Madison folded her arms, waiting for Usha to walk into her trap. But Usha was about to flip the entire conversation on its head. The tension in the studio was palpable. Madison Clarke had thrown what she believed to be a knockout punch at challenging Usha Vance on abortion and women's rights. It was a move designed to corner her, to make her seem out of touch or even anti-woman. But Usha was unshaken. She took a slow breath, then leaned slightly forward in her chair. "You asked if I think restricting abortion is a step backward," she said, her voice measured but firm. "But I think the real question is, why is abortion the only issue that defines women's rights in America?" Madison blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected counter. "Because it's a fundamental right," she said quickly. "A woman should have control over her own body." Usha nodded. "I agree, women should have control over their bodies. But what about the millions of women who don't feel like they have a choice except abortion? What about the women who feel pressured into it because they don't have financial support, job security, or family backing? Why are we talking about their rights?" The audience was silent. Madison shifted in her seat. "So, are you saying abortion should be banned?" Usha shook her head. "I'm saying we need to stop pretending that abortion is the only solution for women in difficult situations. We should be supporting women before they feel like abortion is their only option. That means better maternity leave policies, more support for single mothers, and fostering a culture that values life, not just for the unborn, but for the women who carry them." A smattering of applause broke out from the audience, surprising even Madison. She quickly regrouped. Madison Clarke was running out of ammunition. Every question she had thrown at Usha Vance, every carefully crafted attempt to put her on the defensive, had backfired. Now she was resorting to one of the left's most well-worn arguments, that conservatives weren't being silenced, they were just unpopular. Usha knew this game, and she wasn't going to let it slide. "You asked if conservatives are really being silenced," Usha said, folding her hands in her lap. "Let's look at the facts." Madison leaned back slightly, bracing herself. "Every major social media platform, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, has a documented history of suppressing conservative viewpoints," Usha continued. "Journalists, doctors, and even sitting members of Congress have been censored or banned for expressing opinions that didn't fit the mainstream narrative. Meanwhile, radical voices on the left, some openly advocating violence, are allowed to speak freely. If that's not bias, what is?" The audience was split. Some clapped. Others shook their heads. Madison, however, wasn't going to let her control the narrative. "But isn't it possible," Madison countered, "that these so-called conservative voices are being removed because they're spreading misinformation or dangerous rhetoric?" Usha's lips curled into a small smile. "That's exactly the excuse that's been used to justify censorship. But who decides what's misinformation? For years, people who questioned lockdowns, mask mandates, and vaccine policies were silenced, only for the truth to come out later. When government and big tech work together to control speech, that's not fact-checking, that's propaganda." A louder applause broke out this time. Even some audience members who had come in skeptical were nodding along. Madison adjusted her earpiece, clearly getting instructions from her producers. This interview wasn't going the way they had planned. "Mrs. Vance," Madison said, trying to regain control, "do you honestly believe that conservative voices are the victims here? That the media and tech companies are out to get people like you and your husband?" Usha's eyes locked onto Madison's. Then, with quiet intensity, she delivered the line that would be replayed on television screens across America for weeks. "I don't believe it," she said. "I know it." The studio fell silent. Madison's jaw tightened. Usha let the moment hang in the air before continuing. "The media doesn't fear conservatives because we're extreme," she said. "They fear us because we're right and because people are waking up. They fear parents who are pushing back against radical school curriculums. They fear workers who are rejecting woke corporate policies. They fear everyday Americans who are tired of being told what they can and cannot say. And that's why they try to silence us." By now, half the audience was clapping. Some were even on their feet. Madison looked flustered. She glanced down at her notes, then back up at Usha. But there was nothing left to say. A moment later, the producer's voice cut in. "We have to go to a break." The camera zoomed out. The screen faded to black. And just like that, Usha Vance had done the unthinkable. She had walked into the lion's den, stood her ground, and left unshaken. Within hours, clips of the interview were going viral. Conservative commentators hailed it as a masterclass in composure and truth-telling. Even some moderates admitted they had never seen a guest so effortlessly dismantle a mainstream media narrative. But perhaps the most telling reaction came from Madison Clarke herself. The next morning, she posted a single tweet. "Last night, I interviewed Usha Vance. I may not agree with her, but I respect her. America needs more debates like that." For the first time in a long time, the media had met a conservative they couldn't spin, manipulate, or break. And America was paying attention.